Welcome to the Counselling Armchair, Nurturing Wellbeing and Study, hosted by Counselling and Psychological Services at RMIT University. The Counselling Armchair is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land. This podcast aims to help you manage your university life so you can be at your best. We'll be sharing with you tips on student life here and ways to enhance your mental well-being. Welcome back to the Counselling Armchair, Nurturing Your Wellbeing and Study. Today, we're diving into something that's been on a lot of people's minds. How to look after your mental health when the world around you feels uncertain, overwhelming, or just plain messy. Between climate change, armed conflict, political instability, economic pressures, and the rising cost of living, not to mention the ongoing effects of pandemics, racism, and inequality, it's no wonder so many of us are feeling stretched and at times even hopeless. So in this episode, we're going to explore what well-being really means, how global and personal challenges affect us, and most importantly, what we can do to stay grounded, connected, and hopeful. I'm flying solo today as Melissa unfortunately couldn't be here, but I am joined by my wonderful colleague and special guest, Michael Swadling. Michael, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Could you start by telling us a bit about yourself?
Hi, Liz. Thanks for having me. I've been working at RMIT for about a decade now, and I'm a clinical psychologist by training. When it comes to therapy and helping people who are suffering, I use an approach called acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's something I think has a lot to offer in this space that you're talking about.
Absolutely. That's why we were so keen to talk to you today, Michael.
Wonderful.
Well, let's dive in. Life is just more complicated than ever before, isn't it?
It is.
And it can be a real struggle to maintain good well-being. And what do we actually mean by well-being anyway? It's one of those words that we toss around. What do we mean by it?
Yeah. Look, I think a lot of people mean different things when they say it. But, when I look at it in that sort of scientific sense, that psychological sense, often what we're thinking about in terms of well-being is not necessarily just about being happy all the time. It's sort of separate from happiness, but it's about being able to handle the slings and arrows that life sort of throws at us. So, well-being covers emotional, social, physical, psychological sort of domains. And it's kind of like a spectrum. It's not like someone is just well or just unwell, that there might be somewhere on a continuum between sort of flourishing or thriving and really struggling or suffering. And what we know is that when people are well, when they describe themselves as well, they're often, more engaged with life. They're able to kind of do the kind of things that are important to them, even when there's difficult things that are happening, whether that's in the world around them or whether that's, in terms of their own health, their physical health, their mental health, that kind of thing. We also often talk about like mental illness and mental health, and that's not exactly the same as well-being, that someone can be experiencing mental illness and still be well in a broad sense because they're handling that well, it's being treated or they're getting the supports they need, and they're able to kind of flourish and live the kind of life they want to live.
That's such a great description. I like particularly the idea of it being a continuum, that it's not good or bad, black or white.
Well, and it's a moving line, right? Every time something happens in my day, my well-being changes, right? If I'm waiting to get off the tram and someone pushes in front to get on, that's inconveniencing me. That makes me probably a little bit more frustrated, makes my quality of life a little bit worse.
Yeah.
If there's a long queue when I get to the coffee shop or something like that, these kinds of things, obviously there are much bigger things. These can really negatively impact well-being too, but that it is this constantly moving dynamic thing where the more we're resourced, the better supported we are, the more likely we are to be well. And likewise, when we're not supported in the face of these kind of challenges, the worse our well-being tends to be. And at RMIT, we sort of have this model, this Ways of Wellbeing model. And, this is designed to guide everyone in our community, but especially our students in moving towards that kind of flourishing end. So it sort of looks at, what is it that people could be doing to make sure that they're well. And it sort of tries to divide things that might help with wellbeing into sort of broad categories, broad areas of action. So things like, connection, creativity, purpose, all sort of fit within that in various ways. But it's designed to be kind of a shorthand for people to go, if I'm not feeling well, what could I look for that would tell me this is something that might help, that maybe I'm not doing enough in this domain of my life. You know, maybe I'm handling some of the stuff. I'm being active, and so I'm moving my body around a bunch, but still I'm feeling like my quality of life isn't what I want it to be. So it's probably not that I need to be more active, but there's probably some other things that are missing in my life that I'm wanting to explore and invest in that might improve that quality of life.
Yeah, such a good point. It's not about just doing all of the elements of the ways of wellbeing, but it's a bespoke thing, right? So as you said, if you're already being quite active, you don't need to look at that part of it, but you might need to look at another.
Maybe not, yeah.
Yeah.
And because of that as well, it's sort of this thing that's customizable per person. You know, even when I talk about being active, there's not one way to be active. We know that there's a large body of research that suggests, when people are moving their bodies around more, they're more well, you know, whether that's I'm going for a walk around the block, whether that's I'm playing a sport or going to the gym, maybe it's I'm getting out of the house once a week to go on a hike. You know, it doesn't have to look the same for every person, but we know that generally speaking, staying at home all the time in front of a computer is not great for our well-being. You know, that our bodies haven't evolved to be stuck in one spot, one position, and not seeing an outside world for, you know, most of our time. And so finding ways for any of those ways of well-being, you know, finding your own flavors of those that fit for your life as it is now, even though it might change 6 months from now, you know, is important, I think, if someone's feeling like their well-being isn't where they want it to be.
So how do global challenges, that, like we've mentioned at the top of the episode, political instability, natural disasters, genocide, fear about the future of humanity, just to name a few, there's a lot. How does that impact on our mental health and well-being?
Pretty significantly, I'll say. And it's tricky because sometimes we think, oh, things are worse now than they've been. And that's kind of tricky. When I think back to what it must have been for my parents around the time that they had me as a child. Like that was a time where there was also lots of instability in the world. In fact, you know, there's not really been a time within recent human history where things have all been calm and safe indefinitely. There have been periods where things, for some people in some places, have been better. And that means that we're always under some kind of stress, under some kind of pressure, if we're aware of these things. Now, of course, some of those threats seem even bigger than they might have seemed a few years ago. For my parents, that might have been during the Cold War, where there were threats of nuclear war happening. For us now, you know, as our understanding of global climate factors has improved, you know, we're looking at, you know, climate catastrophe of various kinds. So the more knowledge we have, it sort of sometimes makes it really hard for us to stay well, to look after ourselves, because our mind is reminding us there's all this bigger stuff going on, stuff that you can't control. That's a pretty scary idea. Our bodies and our minds have evolved to live in a world that's like not that big, you know, that where we don't know what's happening all across the world all the time, where we don't have a mobile phone in our pocket that's telling us all these horror stories about what's happening. And that doesn't mean we should ignore those necessarily, but sort of just that's something that we're having to find ways to adapt to, because it's just not the thing that our ancestors have evolved to be able to cope with. And so we're having to sort of on the fly come up with ways of coping as a species with that kind of fear.
You're so right. It is like an evolutionary thing, because, you know, before we had even the capacity to travel as far as we travel, you know, that your whole world was just your community.
Right. And there were disasters and catastrophes that happened in those communities. There was a famine or a plague or you know, a violent outbreak of some kind. And that would be, you know, pretty impactful, of course, on anyone involved. But it was also real and it was happening in front of them. So they could maybe do something about it. They could escape the problem. They could try to help with the problem. But of course, now here we are, you know, getting blasted information from our phones that tells us about all these big things that we can't necessarily feel like we've got any ability to influence, or that anything we try to do to help isn't going to be
enough. It'll be like a drop in the ocean kind of thing.
Right. And I think that adds to that kind of despair. That sort of makes it really tricky for people to stay well. You know, they feel anxious, they feel sad, they feel helpless, they grieve sort of their ideas or expectations for the future because they're getting information that says, well, maybe things won't go the way I had been thinking they would. And when they're juggling normal life, right, there's, you know, there might be students, they might be workers, they're like they're trying to live whatever a normal life means to them. But then they're also dealing with these big ideas. Like, I think that's when it gets really, really tough for people.
It tips you over the edge, doesn't it? It's
like, right. It's one more thing, or like one extra bucket poured in.
What is it, the straw on the camel's back kind of thing?
Yeah. It's pretty hard to keep going in the face of these kinds of things, is what people are finding. You know, and people have different ways. Sometimes it's switching off.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's quite cracked it yet as to how to easily stay well in the face of all this stuff.
So true. And as you said, many of us do feel that it's important to keep up with what's happening in the world. It's not about not doing that, although, I must admit my personal philosophy is not to watch the news because that is my way of managing this issue. I still hear about things because there's so much conversation that happens about these things, but I'm not necessarily locked into consuming news. But if you wanted to still consume some news, but you wanted to have some balance and you wanted it to not get overwhelming, how do you think we can stay informed without burning ourselves out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've all tried to find ways that work for us. And so, I don't necessarily not watch the news, but I do make an effort, for example, not to watch shows that I know are going to be downers for me, right? Fictional shows, because I'm like, well, dealing with real life is bad enough. My job is that of helping people who are suffering in various ways. And so on top of that, having the extra sort of kind of manufactured emotions of watching a TV show that's got these, big dramatic tragedies, that's probably not something I really want to add to the level of stuff I'm already juggling.
I'd not thought about that before. I'd thought about the news thing before, but that's actually a really good point, that if you don't want to limit your news consumption, then that is something you could limit that is going to potentially trigger emotions or distress.
Sure. And, there's, of course, degrees as well to any of these things. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be someone says, I only want to watch a bit of the news, or I'm only going to check it once a day, or I'm only going to spend a certain amount of time engaging with those kinds of stories. I think it's tricky because, of course, the way that a lot of news platforms work now are, they get funding and subscribers based on other, people that are paying attention, right? Their ad revenue for those that have ads, very much depends on how many clicks they're getting or how many views they're getting. So it's in their best interest to make things alarming enough to keep us interested, So, of course, there are lots of journalists out there trying to do good quality journalism work, but the platforms that stories being published on in various ways really do want to grab us and keep us there. And so trying to be picky about how I engage with news, if I do it, is really important, I think, rather than it being kind of like a fire hose that's turned on.
Yeah.
We're sort of right in the middle of it. I guess the thing that's important for me here is that it's more important to prioritize what's useful right now rather than what's true or false. And that doesn't mean I'm ignorant of what's true or false, but just because something's true doesn't make it the most important thing that's happening right now. And when we're looking at these big things, these things that are well beyond the reach of any one person, any one movement even, it lets us recognize that there are some important things to pay attention to, but we can still maybe choose when to pick up our thoughts about that when it's helpful and when to leave those sort of sitting on our lap, right? Not trying to get rid of those worries or those concerns, but maybe not feeding them or growing them either. So whether that's I'm not going to engage in the news because I know when I do, my mind starts getting more anxious, more worried about the future. Whether that's saying, I'm going to only look at news from certain sources or at certain times of the day, right? Those could be ways that someone might do that. And I say news and talk about journalists, but of course, a lot of the time now people are getting their news from social media platforms, from Discord chats, from other places where people are sharing information. So it's not
and maybe misinformation too sometimes.
Well, yeah, and that's true as well, I think. I think it's tricky because we don't want to be uninformed, especially when things do matter to us. So I think that's where those questions about, where do I want to get my news from? What do I want to be sort of trusting? And when are the times where it's helpful for me to engage with this, right? Like often at the end of the day might be the time where it's easiest for us to engage with scrolling on our phone, finding information in various ways, whether that's reels or whether that's a news website. That's also the time where we've probably got the most time to think, right? After that, we go to bed.
True.
We're lying there, our mind's ticking over. There's not much we can do about the stuff we've just heard or read, but our mind's got plenty of time to play with it. And, so there's a question. I'm not saying that there's one right answer to this, but is that the most useful time for someone to engage with the news? Because they're not going to be able to take any action if they feel like they need to. And they're going to be letting their mind kind of run wild with all the ideas and the fears that might be created by that. So, maybe it's trying to sort of pick, is that something I do in the morning? Is that something I find a different time for? Or do I do something in between engaging with the sort of technology that gives me information and going to bed where I have all this quiet time and my mind can do whatever it wants? Trying to sort of find a safe middle ground there where I can be informed if there are things I want to know about, and I can be taking good care of myself so that I'm not sleeping terribly, waking up the next day exhausted. From there, kind of like a snowball rolling downhill, the problem just gets bigger and bigger. I'm more tired. My mind's got more ability to kind of be in survival mode, to be sort of in that fear-based kind of responding. And so those kinds of things hook us more easily. And, that continues on and on and on if we're not careful.
Yeah, I really like that idea of picking the time when you'll do it. And maybe you can keep it boundaried if you choose, if you say, okay, I'm going to do it, like, for argument's sake, before dinner, because, dinner always happens at a certain time. And once you put the plate on the table and whatever and sit down to eat, that's when you turn off the news or whatever source you're reading, and then that's an end. So you're not going to stay endlessly on that because there's something coming up that's scheduled. Yeah, or doing it earlier in the day, or having some sort of a buffer between consumption of that information and bedtime, so that you don't get into that ruminating and thinking
100%.
And anxiousness. Yeah, it makes sense.
I think the other thing is that, often our mind tells us we want to stay informed kind of just because, like with this idea that if I know more, then I'm going to be better prepared. And I'm not saying that's never right. Of course, it is important sometimes just to know what's going on so I can pick where I want to give my attention. But generally, when we're invested in a topic, we want to stay informed because it can inform what we can do about this problem, about this situation. And I think that's important to be thinking about, with the information you've got, what practically can you do to make a difference, whatever that problem is. What are your feelings about the situation urging you to do? When we're feeling helpless, sometimes all we can do is bear witness to what's happening. And, it might be there are times where we are helpless. We can't do anything to engage with that problem. But just bearing witness to what's happened might still feel important to us. That can be pretty overwhelming, though. In the modern age, so much is recorded, so much is captured that it doesn't need to be your job necessarily to bear witness to all of it, right? That you might need to, in this, like for the sake of self-preservation, you might need to pick and choose what are the bits of a tragedy that you're willing to engage with. But I think as well, thinking about other things you can do to make a change, focusing at least some of your effort on the problems that are local, that you can take action on. And that could be, acting directly on local issues. That could be working collectively to lobby or to demand changes of some kind. But any one action isn't really going to be the thing that makes the difference. Any seasoned activist will tell you that it's a long-term campaign. It's not individual activations or events that really make that difference. So if you do want to take action in the face of whatever you're seeing that your mind is focusing on and worried about, approaching with that idea of how do I do this sustainably? How do I do it today so that I can also do it tomorrow or next week, right? Because if I give 100% right now, well, there's not much left in the tank. I'm going to need time to recover, or I'm going to be so burned out that I actually can't engage further. That's a problem, right? There's going to be a next time to act. Any issue is not going to be entirely solved right here and now. And if you pour too much of yourself into one project or one action, you will end up burned out. Audre Lorde, in one of her books, A Burst of Light, sort of had this quote that, caring for myself is not a self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. That making space to take care of yourself is sort of just a necessary part of any kind of resistance, any kind of pushing for change, because the alternative is that you won't be able to keep doing this, and then you're not really much help to the cause.
That's such a good point. I often think about that in terms of the old oxygen masks on the plane metaphor, where they tell you to put your mask on yourself before you put it on the person that you might be traveling with, which can feel counterintuitive. But obviously the reason when you think deeply about it is purely that you cannot help anybody if you are not breathing. And I think that's the case for political causes or making kind of broader changes in society. You have to do it sustainably because you wouldn't, you're not going to achieve anything if you go hard, burn yourself out, and then you can't do any more. So, it's almost a duty, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I would say if you want to be able to keep doing this, if you want to be able to make actually effective, significant change, then that's kind of just the way that has to be done. Like you just can't be effective if you're giving too much at any one time. And there will be times that will ask more of you, certainly. I'm not saying that it should be minimal effort at all times, but, picking and choosing which battles to fight or when to fight them, I think, is part of taking,
It's a good approach. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as you mentioned, it's very anxiety provoking for people, and they might just feel more scared than motivated to do the sort of things that we're talking about. So what can you do if you're like that? If you're just like almost frozen by the fear, what are some practical things you can do to look after your well-being in those times?
Yeah, I think when there's big news, bad news, big changes happening in the world or big fears showing up, it's it's really common to be sort of stuck and unsure what to do. Think back to sort of the pandemic era where we were all having to make, especially here in Victoria, we were having to make a lot of big changes pretty quickly. Many people find that maintaining routine helps create steadiness in their life. Now, when there's change going on, especially if it's local, you might not be able to keep routine in all parts of your life, but finding some parts of your life where you still can maintain that, I think, is really important. So that just might be some regular activities, catching up with the same people, trying to sort of have hobbies to engage in or interests that you can still engage in, even just trying to make sure that you're waking up and going to bed at around the same time where that's possible.
So there are some parts of your life that are predictable kind of thing, where it's like you can count on.
Thinking back to our ancestors again, that, they didn't grow up in a world that was as changing as ours is, at least most of the time. And so the things that were helpful in helping them survive were having a brain that worked well with consistency. And so we've got brains that we've inherited from them that are also, work best in situations where things are predictable, or at least some things are predictable. So trying to maximize those where you can and not let routines or habits fall away if, unless they're really not serving you anymore, I think might be part of staying well when you're feeling overwhelmed. A really common thing that happens when you're overwhelmed is, those thoughts and those feelings get really big, get really loud. So finding ways to kind of stay grounded, to be grounded like in the present moment, here and now, can help you be in control of your arms, your legs, your mouth, the parts of you that can take action. When you're tuned into the world around you and with what's happening in your body as they actually are happening right now in the moment, not sort of with the narratives or the stories your mind's telling you about what's going to happen next, sort of the way our mind can run with an idea. So when we're really in touch with what's happening right now, well, we're in the position where we can start taking actions. I can worry about the future, but I can't take actions in the future until it gets here. So recognizing that right now, if I can stay connected with what's happening in the room I'm in, with the people I'm talking to, with how my body's feeling, I'm actually in a much better position to be able to take action if I need to. But even if those actions are just basic self-caring actions, right? They don't have to be big things, but just rather than being stuck and paralyzed, I'm able to live my life.
Yeah. As we said, if the first step is self-care to get yourself into a position where you have enough positive or, healthy well-being, then that is your first duty, right? If that's all you're doing, that's fine, because that's what needs to happen to kind of get you to the point where you could potentially be unfrozen. But that's got to be that first port of call, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think important as well to think about, the environments that you're in, the environments that make you feel safe. So that means, having people around who make you feel safe and supported, being in, physical environments that aren't overwhelming to your senses without having constant interruptions, like your phone sending you a bunch of notifications about what's going on. Having that safety, having that ability to kind of let our nervous system be regulated, I think, is also really important in breaking the ice when we're feeling overwhelmed. So sometimes that's all we can do is make some practical adjustments, reach out to a friend, change where I am, and that might help us take care of ourselves, soothe ourselves at times where we're feeling really activated or really overwhelmed.
Absolutely. One of my go-to things is having a bath, because I think the temperature, just the sensation of the warmth on the skin and being in water is such a soothing, calming, it's almost a primal thing, maybe, I don't know, but it's there's something about the bath that just feels comforting. And I can recall a time when my son, he's not a baby, he's nearly 20, my goodness. 20 years ago when he was a baby, he was a bit unsettled, not a bit, a lot. He was screaming his head off. And I was my nervous system was so overstretched. I was I can't handle this anymore. And I remember my husband saying to me, go and have a bath. And I'm going to take the baby and just walk up and down the hallway until he stopped screaming. And he was just patting him and comforting him. And the minute that I got into that warm water, I felt contained and safe and calm. Not completely calm, but calmer. And so I think it sometimes can be quite a small thing that you do to bring yourself comfort, but it makes a difference.
If we're able to have that kind of time out, I think it makes such a big difference in how well we can be and how we can take care of ourselves. Temperature's a really interesting one. There's some modeling around our sort of our nervous system in terms of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And, the parasympathetic nervous system is the kind of that soothing, calming kind of instinct, right? So, at the end of the day, that's what sort of kicks in to make us sleepy, for example. And a lot of people find, every nervous system's a little bit different, but many people find that if they have a drop in temperature, in core body temperature, then their parasympathetic nervous system activates. So the classic example would be, when I get out of a hot bath or a hot shower, afterwards I often start feeling kind of sleepy, like it's kind of kicking in.
Interesting.
And, again, we can hypothesize about evolutionary roots to that, right? When the sun goes down, the campfire dies down, our ancestors, like that was the natural time when our body temperature dropped, was the time to rest, to recollect our energy and be ready for the next day. And so we can kind of simulate that, I suppose, in our own way by doing things that might bring our temperature up and then letting it drop. And that doesn't necessarily mean jumping into an ice bath. Once we're out of the warm bath or the shower, that we often find that naturally our body starts to kind of activate soothing, relaxing processes.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Now, alongside all of that, limiting exposure to things that make us feel threatened, make us feel provoked, that's really important. But also, not just to be focused on the negative and the avoiding, but think about what are the things I'm doing that are bringing me joy, that are bringing me a sense of meaning, right? That might be, connecting with people. It might be engaging in hobbies. It might be taking some kind of actions, some kind about the problem or about other things in life, but finding ways to kind of have some sense of purpose, I think, could be really helpful. And, maybe reminding ourselves a little bit about what is in our control. What are the parts of whatever's in front of us that we can act. And some of those things we can't control are things like our thoughts and our feelings. Our mind's just going to throw stuff at us, whether we like it or not. And so,
our brain is a thinking machine at the end of the day.
Right.
That's its output.
Yeah, it's this organ that just, for a problem solves, takes in sensory information and tries to solve the problem that it sees there. And that means it's going to be sending us stuff all the time. It's going to be, constantly blasting messages at us. And so we're not failing at being calm and collected if our mind's still chattering away. It would be nice if sometimes it's quiet. Some people are lucky enough that their mind does get quiet sometimes. But even if that's not happening, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're failing at taking good care of ourselves, because our mind isn't directly in our control in the same way that our heartbeat isn't directly in our control. Our mind's just going to keep doing mindy things where we kind of have to find a way to live with that, I think.
Yeah. I always thought that when I would do meditations, like in the early years of trying to do meditations, and I'd go, empty your mind. And I'd be like, God damn it, I'm so bad at meditation because I can't empty my mind.
Yeah.
And then I found this fantastic app, which I really like, called One Giant Mind. And in that intro to the meditation, they actually say exactly what you're saying, which is you will think thoughts. That is what our brains do. They think thoughts, and that's fine. And all, you really need to do is notice when you've gone off track, gently bring yourself back to the present moment. And if you need to do that 50 or 100 times during the meditation, that's fine. That's just how our brains work. And I was like, oh, at last, I found a way to meditate. Because I used to feel really guilty. Like, I have a lot of mind chatter and, I could never just turn it off. And now I know no one can. That's an illusion that you can empty your mind. But I think that's a really important point.
I think it is. And recognizing that because we're all individuals who've got, different bodies, different minds, the things that work for one person won't necessarily work for everyone, right? Even meditation itself just might not be a thing that your mind wants to do.
Yeah.
But finding other ways to tap into the same kind of processes that meditations talk about, being able to pay attention to what my thoughts and my feelings are saying, being able to regard those and interact with those non-judgmentally, from a bit of a distance rather than being caught up in the thick of them and pushed around by those thoughts and feelings. Like, however someone finds a way to do that is useful. It doesn't matter if they're doing meditation to do that or whether they're finding some other way to tap into that sort of sense of flow or of connection with themselves.
It might be just engaging with the world through your five senses, right? Like 100%. Literally smelling the roses, and just really noticing what's around you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think anything that's connecting us to the present moment, and sensory experience is such a big part of that, is a great opportunity for us to kind of dial ourselves in and, gently guide ourselves back away from the thoughts and feelings that are bossing us around and back to like, hey, what's happening right in front of me? What do I want to do in response to my direct surroundings rather than this big, big picture, unsolvable problem kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I think too, like something like, say, climate change or concern about environmental issues, it can be really easy to just go, what difference does it make? Like, it's such a big problem. How do my individual actions make a difference? The way I like to think about it is that if we all do something towards sustainable living, the collective impact of that can be huge. But you're just doing your part, like you're just composting in your house.
Sure.
You're just recycling in your house. You're just having shorter showers at your home. It's like these are all doable things within your immediate sphere of influence. And it might not feel like it's doing much, but just remember that you're part of a collective whole. And the more that people start doing those things, the more that it actually will make a difference.
The more normalized it becomes, the more people are going to do it. The more people that do it, the more likely it is to make an impact. Yeah. So being part of a greater whole, I think, is sort of one of those.
It's a good way to think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be. I think to be connected with a sense of community doesn't necessarily make the fears go away, but it can sort of soothe that to some extent.
Yeah, which is actually a really great segue into the next question that was on the list, which is about whether being part of a community or engaging in activism can help with well-being.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, it depends is probably my answer. For many people, I think when there's something that they're really invested in, that maybe they're scared about, maybe something that they're passionate about, connecting with others is often a really good way to feel engaged and energized, I guess, to feel some sort of uplift in their own sort of sense of purpose and well-being that comes along with that. Not being alone, not feeling alone, being able to celebrate some wins along the way with others, these are really important. And as sort of we said earlier, that if you're throwing yourself into this stuff nonstop, burnout seems like the natural consequence of that. Being part of communities that care about things also means being exposed to hearing about pain, hearing about injustice. When that becomes kind of all-consuming, when that becomes, the core of your identity, I suppose, is being part of a group, any setback the group experiences gets felt very personally, right? It's not that they've had a setback, it's that I've failed to achieve the thing that we're pushing towards. Feelings of grief, feelings of guilt can build pretty easily there, feeling like you're not doing enough. So that can add to the hopelessness instead of relieving it. So it can go both ways. It's a double-edged blade. Not wanting to be a broken record here, but I think the key is sort of balance. So you're starting small, choosing causes or actions that feel manageable rather than overwhelming, pacing yourself, making time for rest, for joy, for other parts of life. If you're going to be an activist, making that part of your life, but it has to be part, not all of your life. Focusing on the community and the connection, especially at the local level, because that's where that stuff is strongest and can make the biggest immediate difference. If we're focused on that building community, on building connection, rather than exclusively on outcomes, then we're better able to ride out whatever waves are coming. That sense of solidarity, of being sort of having a joint purpose there, can be kind of soothing or healing kind of resource for us in that way. But again, that sort of thinking about that sustainability piece, that if I'm going to be doing this, I need to make sure that I'm doing it in a way that makes me able to keep doing it. So having that community around you can go both ways there, but making sure that it's something that fuels you and that keeps you in the loop, even if you need to take a step back for a while, rather than feeling this pressure to be on the front line, to be pushing for every action directly yourself and not having any time for the other stuff in your life.
Balance is such an important word. Like, it is a simple concept in some ways, but you hear it like, study life balance, work life balance. Like we do talk about balance a lot, and it's for exactly those reasons that things to be sustainable, you need to have not just one thing in your life, not just be working all the time, not just be studying all the time, not just be engaging in activism all the time. It's got to be, and as you said, like time for joy and laughter and silliness and fun is so important, and we just don't prioritize it very much. And it might, it can feel you can feel bad about it because you think, oh my God, so many terrible things happening in the world, and here am I wanting to do something frivolous and fun. But actually it's just part of this process of self-care and staying well enough to be able to make a difference.
Yeah. I think about my honours research when I did my honours degree here at RMIT in 2011. My honours thesis was on burnout in psychologists. And psychologists they aren't inherently activists. But what they obviously are doing is often helping people when they're dealing with moments of pain and suffering. So there's some overlap, I think, in terms of the experience there. And what that research suggested was that the psychologists who were least burned out were able to maintain a sense of humour. So I think being able to connect with joy about, even in the face of difficult experiences, is something that we can hypothesize that's sort of sustaining on its own. Being able to be connected with that shared experience of enjoyment that comes out of that, and that goes along with exercising and being mindful and other kind of things as well. But, that humor piece was quite interesting to me because I hadn't expected that to come out in the data.
Yeah. But it makes sense. It really does make sense.
And it goes both ways. When someone's feeling really burnt out, it's not surprising that they maybe find it really difficult to see the lighter side of things or to sort of roll with the punch in that way. So it's tricky to know, which is the chicken and which is the egg here, right? What starts first. But, we know that when someone is better able to maintain a sense of humor, it's likely that they're well in that way as well.
So it's a good thing to foster, isn't it?
I think so, yeah, make sure we're finding opportunities for it. And for not all to be dark or gallows humor, I'd say, a bit of that's fine.
Yeah,
especially when we're dealing with heavy topics, but to make sure that, that doesn't become all consuming, I think, because then it becomes its own kind of, problem.
I think even just being playful. Like that last week we had Wellbeing Week here at RMIT and we had an activity. I'm at the Bundoora campus of RMIT and we did some sand art. And basically it's like a piece of paper that's like sticky, like a sticker, but it's got, like the backing of a sticker that's in sections. Yep. So it might be like a picture of a kangaroo and you peel off one bit of the sticker that's the kangaroo's leg. And then that reveals the sticky bit. And then you pour the sand over the top of that.
A paint by numbers, but with sand.
A paint by numbers, but with sand, right? With coloured sand. And there were lots of students that engaged with it, which was just so lovely. And I just looked at the kind of playful joy on their faces and I felt quite effervescent just watching them. And we were kind of laughing about how, oh my God, like some of the students were saying things like, oh, I can't wait to tell my parents that at uni today I made a sand picture like in kindergarten, kind of thing. And we're all having a bit of a giggle about it. But just noting that how when people re-engage with that joy and that playfulness, how it does make them feel better.
Being creative.
There was a student who...
it's just such an important thing.
And being creative. Like people were so focused on doing it and picking the colours and coming up with their own individuality, and the differences in the pictures were beautiful to see. I took lots of photos of people's pictures that they made. And I just thought, people could look at an activity like this and go, that's for kids. I'm not doing that. But actually, when you engage with playfulness like that, and even things that kids would do, it actually makes a huge difference to your well-being.
Kids often cope with the world a lot better than adults do, I think. There's,
so true, yeah.
And when you're a student especially, I think there's, so many rigid rules you've got to fit within, whether it's a referencing system or deadlines, and marking rubrics and all this kind of stuff. And even if you're in a creative discipline, then your creativity becomes work. So you've still got to kind of push it and make it happen. But something like that sort of sounds like it's this kind of, no expectations. You can just engage for the joy of engaging, and not surprising that, everyone was able to have a great time if they were up for it.
Yeah. Made me think I should do it like once a week. I'd probably get heaps of people coming if I did it.
Not a bad idea. Yeah.
No, exactly. So, Michael, you mentioned the Ways of Wellbeing model, which I know you were really involved in building. So you have done an amazing job with it. And that's a really useful guide for students in managing wellbeing. And I understand that it's built on the principles of both positive psychology and acceptance and commitment therapy. So tell us a little bit more about ACT. I know you've said a little bit about it so far through the course of our discussion today. But just, what's Cliff Notes or whatever you call it, sort of like a quick summary of what ACT is in a nutshell.
Sure, I will do my best. And acknowledging the ways of wellbeing are built off a few sources. So there was an earlier 5 Ways to Wellbeing model created in the UK in the 90s. And so sort of building from that, but incorporating some ideas from ACT and from the larger body of contextual behavioural science research that underpins it. But, what stands out to me about ACT is that it kind of presents this way of looking at the world, of being in the world, that helps you make room for uncomfortable experience. So thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, where they're the price of admission to doing stuff that matters to you, for building the kind of life you want to have. So not suffering unnecessarily, not saying I'm going to do this just because it's going to hurt emotionally, but going, well, I'm not going to let the fact that this is going to be uncomfortable or painful internally stop me from chasing the stuff that I want. Maybe the classic example here would be, got a job interview coming up, right? Like for most people, having a job interview is going to come with some level of anxiety. Even if they're a seasoned pro at interviewing, there's going to be some level of, I don't know how well this one's going to go. Maybe I'm a bit invested in it. I care about it. So if someone wants to be able to have all the stuff that comes with that job interview and hopefully, a job that comes out of that, well, that's only really possible by paying the price of having that anxiety in their life. And it's no guarantee. It might be the job doesn't work out, but to even be in the running, chances are we're going to have to feel some of that discomfort. Yeah. And it's tricky because one of the things that sometimes gets said in regards to ACT is this idea of pain and purpose being two sides of the same coin. Like we care where we hurt. The things that are most important to us also have the most potential to make us feel uncomfortable things. Anyone who's been through a breakup would know that that's something a relationship's often something we care about, and it's often, the end of it is something that hurts a lot in various ways.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas if it was a stranger, if we had a breakup with someone we, just met on the street, well, that doesn't matter much to us. That's someone we don't have any investment in, right? So it's the amount of caring we do or has this flip side, which is the amount of pain that might come with it. So ACT broadly talks about building skills that aid with this idea of psychological flexibility, and a sort of the fancy way of defining that is kind of this ability to contact the present moment more fully, as a conscious human being, and then to either change or to persist in behavior, whichever serves to get you closer to what matters to you in that moment. So maybe an example of the kind of skills or capacities people might build, through an ACT approach would be the ability to get unstuck from difficult thoughts so that they can pursue the things in life that are meaningful to them, even though those challenges might still be there. It's not about getting rid of the thoughts. I'm not sure any humans ever manage to banish a thought from their head forever. It's a guarantee that it's never going to come back. Yep. But instead about being able to let that thought be there and not letting it sort of push you around or tell you what to do, even when it does show up.
And that's a great description of it. I love so much of what you said there. How can that approach help when the world feels overwhelming or heavy or hopeless? Just to come back to our sort of focus for today, how could you use those approaches to help with that?
I can think about both the ways of wellbeing and ACT being really useful in that way. So, if I start with the ways, because they're a bit more broad and general, they're drawing on various sources of evidence about what's associated with humans being well, humans suffering less, gives us that kind of checklist that says, do I feel connected? Have I had fun or creativity lately? Am I sleeping okay? And they're sort of different flavors. The ways are framed as these big, broad categories, so that the 6 of them, being connected, being active, being curious, being thoughtful, being grounded, and being balanced. And they're not meant to be prescriptive. Everyone can make their own choice, as I said, about what being active might mean to them, for example. But they give us a kind of reference point about what might be lacking in our life if we notice we're not enjoying it in the way we might previously have enjoyed it. So that lets us sort of notice what's missing and maybe taking some small, maybe some realistic steps, maybe doing some experiments for ourselves to kind of rebalance. Maybe it's calling a friend, going for a walk or something. Maybe it's going, my balance is sort of a bit off. Emotionally, cognitively, maybe I need to rest more. Maybe I need to be looking after my physical health more. Feeding myself differently, going to the doctors when something feels wrong. All this kind of stuff adds up.
Having a bath.
Right, yeah, having a relaxing bath. If we zoom in on ACT specifically as a kind of a way of approaching the world as a sort of a set of skills, I find that, this sort of like looking at things through this ACT lens encourages making space for those uncomfortable feelings rather than getting into a fight with them. When we're trying to avoid something, whether it's an external threat or one that's inside our mind, we're usually in some kind of survival mode. And, when we're in survival mode, we're kind of got the tunnel vision. We're only looking at, scanning around. We're just looking for an exit. We're looking for a way to get away from the problem. And sometimes that's really important to do, but it means we kind of ignore anything that isn't immediately helpful to getting away from the threat. When we're able to be a bit more flexible, to kind of slow ourselves down, actually check in with what's happening around us, then, with that wider perspective that comes with that, even if those uncomfortable internal experiences are present, thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, then we're still able to assess what options are really available to us there. And so sometimes it might be that finding that exit's going to still be the right thing to do, but we've got more choice, we've got more opportunity, we've got better quality of life, generally speaking. Even if the outcome is the same, we still pick the same thing that's actually a choice rather than it being kind of this thing that we have to do on autopilot. And I think people often find that that does make a difference, is doing something on purpose rather than just by default, gives them a greater sense of agency in their life.
Yeah, it's a powerful distinction.
It really is, yeah. And, so ACT sort of points out you can still choose to move towards the stuff that matters to you when things are tough. So like, this is hard, but here's a small step I can take towards what's important for me in this situation.
It's that idea of there's that phrase, feel the fear and do it anyway kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
There's a bit of a pun that we sometimes talk about in ACT circles around feeling better versus feeling better. And, generally when we think about what feeling better means, we think that I should have feelings that are more positive. But actually, sometimes what we need to do to be able to be in touch with the world is to feel better, to be better at the process of the feeling, being more able to actually be there with whatever feelings do show up. And that's almost a precursor to being able to feel good, because otherwise all we end up doing is engaging in all sorts of avoidance. At the low level, that might just be like, we're trying not to think about things, or, opting out of certain stuff. But humans are pretty innovative when it comes to avoidance. So, we look at things like drinking, drug use, these kinds of things that often come from a place of avoidance as well. I'm trying not to feel certain things. I'm trying to force myself to feel certain things, and changing what's happening inside our body with various chemicals, with things that change the way that our internal chemistry works. That's sometimes a pretty effective way of changing how I actually feel or what I'm feeling. But it obviously isn't a thing that lasts, and it tends to come with side effects and all these other kind of problems.
But that's why it's so alluring, isn't it?
Yeah. So, avoidance is a pretty natural thing for not just for humans, for any organism.
No, it makes sense. Yeah. And so we've mentioned that ACT stands for acceptance and commitment therapy. So the A is the bit that stands for acceptance. But people might be wondering, doesn't that just mean giving up? So what does acceptance actually mean for this kind of discomfort or despair?
Yeah, I do wish that they'd picked a better word when they were naming it, because acceptance does feel a bit like I'm going to grit my teeth and I'm going to tolerate it. But acceptance in ACT is maybe better described as kind of a willingness to do things even though those uncomfortable feelings might show up and they might be present. If the things are things I want or I need to do, so being able to acknowledge the reality of the current situation for me here now, instead of pretending that it's not there, or wishing and hoping that it wasn't painful, or maybe going, I'll wait until some moment in the future where maybe it won't be painful anymore, or even just trying to push away or avoid that discomfort. If we can decide to be willing to have that discomfort because it's along the path to something that matters to us, that having these thoughts, having these feelings might be part of the price of admission to being the kind of person we want to be, to having the things in life that are important to us, well, then we can actually start making moves towards that life. We know that it might not be easy, but we can sort of go, well, we can scope it out and say, yep, I'm willing to have this feeling, and, as you said, sort of feel the fear and do it anyway, right? So I'm willing to feel awkward, uncomfortable, sad, because it feels like doing that is more real, and it lets me be in the real world where I can take real actions instead of trying to pretend that I'm not feeling these things.
And also not to miss out on things. Like my daughter's in Japan at the moment on a school trip, and she was very, very nervous, but she was willing to sit with that anxiety and that discomfort because the experience of a trip to Japan, even though she was massively out of her comfort zone, was so worthwhile.
Right. And if she'd chosen to avoid, right, if she'd said, actually, I really don't want to feel this anxiety of being in a new place, and decided to run with that, it's not like that all the bad feelings would go away. While she was at home and seeing photos from her friends who are having a great time in Japan, she'd be feeling a lot of other feelings, that wouldn't be fun, right? So it's not like there's, our brain often sort of tells us this lie that, well, if I just opt out of this, then I won't feel anything bad. But it doesn't tend to work that way, is my experience. Yeah.
No.
So once you're willing, then you get to choose how to respond to what life's throwing at you in ways that line up with your values. So it's got to be this sort of active process, not this kind of passive tolerance and acceptance, but kind of an active willingness to me.
It's not going with it. It's moving towards it consciously and deliberately.
Yeah. At a pace that works for you and,
For you. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've sort of covered this a little bit, but in terms of that emotional overload from constant bad news, what specifically do you think could help with that?
Yeah. When I think about that idea of psychological flexibility, then if I'm able to be flexible, which I'm not 100% of the time, but we can all strive towards, then we can notice when our mind's going into overdrive, being able to guide it back to what's happening right here in the present, where I can actually take some small actions, whether those are actions about caring for myself or caring for the world that I'm in. But so much of it really hinges on being able to be in contact with that present moment. So staying grounded in the here and now on what's important to me, instead of constantly being kind of pulled and pushed by things like fear of the future, fear about what might be happening. If we're able to tune into what's showing up right now, where we can pay attention to our own needs, whether they're physiological or psychological, we can be connected with what's around us, and that means the people around us, the things that are happening in our vicinity that we could do something about. It also means that we're able to draw on any resources that are present in our environments, whether that's our physical environment, social, emotional environment. If we're not in the here and now, then we can actually miss out on a lot of the stuff that might be replenishing and resourcing for us. And that leaves us in a pretty bad spot when we're then trying to push ourselves. So all of that stuff is really hard to do when our mind is running way ahead of us, when it's trying to predict future problems and make a plan for it. And that's often what happens when it's getting a lot of bad news. But if we're able to kind of rein it in and say, hey, look, I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to protect me, but actually I just need to check what's actually happening now. So, life as it is and not as my mind's saying it is, then I'm actually in a much better spot to start making some changes, I think, and to look after myself as well.
Yeah, I mean, we can't control what happens in the future because it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
But
Yeah.
the present moment is now.
It is.
Right
and,
here, right
I can't
now.
change what happened in the past either. So, like, the now is really the only time where I can really take any action that might be effective.
Yeah.
No guarantee that it
Yeah.
will be. But
Yeah.
once I'm here, once I'm in the present moment, then I can start taking even the smallest kind of actions. But getting back in touch with that present moment, isn't something that, in some ways it does come naturally, and in other ways it's something that I guess modern life has trained out of us. We've got minds that are so good at thinking about the next thing that's going to happen and making plans and trying to solve problems. But all of that is only so useful as to inform what we do right now. And that what we do now might build towards over time, like all the different nows might build towards bigger plans. But me sitting there thinking about it all is not me taking any action about it. So at some point, I've got to be in touch. And for me, the easiest ways to get back in touch with what's happening right here and now, as you mentioned, are paying attention to my senses, because any sensory input I'm getting is going to be something that's happening in the present.
Right
you
now.
know? I might, like, our brains don't remember past senses in quite the same way that they experience the things that are happening right now. I can pay attention to my internal body sensations as well. I can sometimes pay attention to my thoughts and my feelings. I can guide my attention to those. These are all things that are happening, not the content of the thoughts, but that there is a thought happening and what my mind is telling me, without getting into kind of the, is this true, is this not, but just, hey, my mind's telling me this thing. Okay, well, that's a thing that's happening right now, is that my mind is telling me this story.
Gives you a bit of distance from the thought as well, doesn't it? By observing it as just a thought that's
Yeah. So
happening?
the original name actually for acceptance and commitment therapy, before they came up with that name, was comprehensive distancing, which is a bit of a, doesn't mean a lot, I think, to people outside the whichever circle that was conceived in. But that, fundamentally that's what it was about, is being able to look at your own internal stuff from a distance, your thoughts, your feelings, without getting pulled into them, without getting caught up in them, but being able to just kind of observe them non-judgmentally. And I think there's a bit more to ACT than that initial sort of name and model, but I think that's, there's something in that about, we can only do so much from the inside. And so if we're able to take a step back and look at the whole thing, then suddenly we are better able to see what's happening. It's kind of like, the metaphor that comes to mind is like one of those parking cameras in modern cars, right? Like, we can look over our shoulder and try to work out where the end of our car is in relation to the wall behind us that we're backing towards. But actually, if we're able to look at things from a different perspective, suddenly we've got a lot more information about what's going on, about the location of the thing. Even for those, that part of us that's paying attention to that is still part of us, like still inside, is looking at it from a different direction. And so it's able to give us new information we didn't otherwise have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Someone once said to me that a really good way to do it is to third person the thought.
Sure.
So to actually say something like, Liz is having the thought that, or Liz is having a thought, or Liz is thinking about. And by referring to myself as Liz, I'm immediately, it's like I'm talking about somebody else.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it just immediately allows me to step back and look at it instead of being in it.
Yeah, that's a really cool perspective shift. I don't think I thought of it that way. In ACT, we often talk about even just labeling, like I'm having the thought that, I am noticing that I'm having the thought. So now we're paying attention to the noticing that's occurring, not just to the thought.
Yeah.
But anything that gives us that sort of space to look at it and go, hey, what do I want to do? How do I want to show up right now with all of this going on? I think that's important.
Absolutely. So we mentioned earlier that people can feel a bit guilty about focusing on their own well-being when there's so many bad things happening in the world. There's so much struggle. Can you say a bit more about how people can see self-care as something meaningful and not selfish?
Yeah. There's this quote, the actress Joan Crawford is usually where it's attributed, that sort of, you're not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. And, I don't mean to be callous when I say that, right? But, the idea is that, I guess it speaks to a lot of what we've already been saying, that, you can only do any of this sustainably if you're okay. Yeah. There are degrees of okay, right? So it's a spectrum. It's not like it's all or nothing, but, you need to be taking good care of yourself. Self-care, investing in our own well-being, resourcing ourselves, isn't about being checked out. It's about connecting with those resources that we have so that when we do need them, they're available, so that we can show up at the times that are important, but that we're doing that in a way that also means we're rested, where we've managed some of the other things in life that are also important, right? But life doesn't stop going on just because we're focused on one important thing.
Right. We still need to eat and do the laundry and pay the bills.
You mentioned that oxygen mask metaphor, and, that's something that I think a lot of therapists would talk about to clients as a way of kind of reminding them that, you can only take care of other people if you've got your basics sorted out, right? Outside of emergencies, but generally speaking, if you're a parent and you're on this plane with your kid and the masks drop from the ceiling, you're probably going to be panicking, everyone's going to be panicking. If there actually is an oxygen loss in the plane there, and you go to put your kid's mask on, it's possible that you might pass out, right? And then your kid's mask might or might not be on properly, but they're not in a position to help you depending on their age, right? So you're the adult here. You need to be taking care of yourself. And then, yeah, of course, making sure that once you're resourced, making sure the people around you are resourced as well is pretty fundamental human instinct. But that can't happen if you're unconscious. And so, if you're burned out, the same kind of thing applies. If you look after yourself, then you're stronger, you're better able to contribute to the world around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've alluded to it already today, Michael, but another important aspect of ACT is around this idea of values, like knowing what your values are. So what role can values play in this situation when the world feels chaotic?
Yeah. Look, and when we use that word values in ACT, we're sort of meaning specifically the kind of the things that matter most to you in life. So the kind of person you want to be, how you want to show up in the world. So they're not sort of goals like, I want to finish my degree, or, they're more like a compass direction. So no matter where I'm standing, I could always work out where east is from here, and I could always move further east. And in the same way, if I have a value about connection, or a value about belonging, or about helping others, or about mastering skills, or, there's always things I could invest more in, even if I've ticked off any specific goal that flows from those values. So when life is sort of chaotic and we're not sure what to do, values that can be kind of a compass there too. They can guide us towards directions that matter to us. So they kind of give us something solid to hold on to when things feel unstable. They let us focus on what feels like it matters to us, and kind of help remind us of who we want to be in the face of whatever this situation is. So maybe if a core value for you is about helping other people, when you read about climate change, you read about conflicts, you might feel a lot of despair. You care a lot about helping other people and about other people being okay. But you could take some actions in line with that value. So guided by your desire to help others, small actions, and that might be volunteering locally. That might be donating time or money or resources to a cause. It might be supporting someone in your community. Small steps like that can help you feel like you're being the kind of person that you want to be. And in turn, that makes you feel maybe more empowered, more connected rather than helpless. And it might mean that if you do that, you're actually better able to then take on bigger things because you've kind of resourced yourself in that way. If you've been, acting in line with your values kind of feeds us often.
It feels congruent, feels like authentic.
Yeah. Let's just be the kind of person we need to be, I think.
How can people learn what their values are? Like, do you have any tips or resources that can help with that?
Yeah, sure. If we're sort of in a therapy environment, I suppose we might do some sort of exercises, playing around with a bunch of cards that have got different kind of value words written on them, or worksheets, these kinds of things. But I think for anyone who's sort of doing this solo, thinking about what can prompt some reflection for them on what matters to them, what kind of person do they want to be in different domains of their life, relationships, work, or community. Sometimes even asking ourselves questions like, what do I want to be remembered for, or how do I want people to think about me? If you imagine this kind of idea of, maybe it's your 60th birthday for those of us that are under 60, and thinking about the kind of speeches people might give. You're thinking about the kind of things you'd like to imagine people saying about you, sort of celebrating the life that you've had up to then. What are the kind of words you'd want them to use to describe you, right?
That's a really good one.
Someone's confident, or they're compassionate, or, they work really hard, or they know how to have a good time, right? These are all kind of things that speak to, how we want to be remembered, how we want to be experienced by other people. And to me, those often speak to some of the values. They don't always line up one for one, but I think it often gets pretty close. Things like journaling can be another kind of way of reflecting. So we might want to check in on times where we felt proud or fulfilled or really alive, really connected with what's happening around us, and thinking about, what is it that tells me about who I am? If this is the sort of situation that makes me feel like I'm on, I feel like I'm really like living my life. What does that say about what I want to be trying to have more of in my life, who I want to be? One of the ways of well-being to maybe less clearly apparent what it means is this idea of being thoughtful. And, that comes out of, I guess, a body of research that suggests that people who are connected with a community, who give back or contribute in some way to a sense of a greater whole, instead of just being focused on themselves and their own individual needs, those, ironically, people who are giving more to the communities around them are more likely to be well. So even though they're not, so in, practical ways, that might look like, even in the face of global despair. If you care about kindness, if you care about community, maybe it's volunteering at a charity. Maybe it's cooking a meal for a neighbor or a housemate. Maybe it's checking in on a friend who has been having a tough time and just kind of reaching out and showing that you care in that way. Those are acts that are in line with values around kindness or community. Those let someone feel like they're making a difference in small ways. They connect with a sense of purpose, and yet they won't fix big problems, right? Like the goal is not necessarily to fix the big problem itself.
It's not to create world peace.
No, I mean, it'd be fabulous if cooking a nice meal for your housemate
wouldn't it?
Maybe it can create housemate peace if things have been a bit tense recently. But
that's true.
It's probably not going to fix the problem on its own. But, we do know is also that sometimes, kind acts can have a ripple effect, right? If I resource someone else, if I make their life a little bit easier, they've got more fuel left in their tank. So they're able to better resource other people as well. That's sort of a paying it forward idea. And I can't guarantee just because I've been nice to someone that they're going to be nice to others. That's just a hope. That's an intention. But, it does happen sometimes, often I'd hope. And so by putting that out there, by supporting people where we've got excess resources, more time, more energy, et cetera, to share with others, then we often find that they are able to share when they've got an excess, they can also support other people, and it sort of can make community better. It can make the world a better place bit by bit is our hope.
Definitely. I do think there is a contagion effect with kindness. Like I think when we observe other people being kind, we're more inclined to be kind ourselves. And the great thing about kindness is that it serves both the giver and the receiver.
Sure, yeah.
So the receiver of kindness feels good and the giver of kindness feels good. So it's a great thing to practice.
Even if I wanted to be really cynical about it, right, we can also think about ideas of social obligation, right? If you're kind to someone, then they might just be aware that, well, people are kind of expecting me now to act in line with what people around me are acting like. So they might be more likely to be kind. Even if they're not feeling kind, they might still act nicer.
It role models it.
Sure. It sets a standard, So that's important too.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today on this really important topic. And thank you to all our listeners for being here with us today on the Counselling Armchair. We hope that in a small way, our conversation today might help you feel a bit more hopeful or understood. You are not alone when it comes to global despair. But remember, while we can't control everything happening in the world, we can take small steps to care for our mental well-being, to connect with others, to focus on what truly matters to us. Those small things won't change the world on their own, but they help us to focus on the things we can control and the things that make a meaningful difference to you and others. And if we all thought that way, bigger changes would happen too. If you're struggling, please reach out, whether it's a friend, a counsellor, or a support service. You're not alone. If you found this episode helpful, please consider subscribing and sharing with others. Your support helps us bring this important conversation to more people. Please take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today on the Counselling Armchair, Nurturing Wellbeing and Study. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned a useful thing or two. Have a great week, and just remember that life can be amazing. See you next time.
Isn't life so amazing? Sometimes it can get crazy, but hey, that's okay. We've got another day to make mistakes and say sorry. There's no sense in our worry, 'cause all we can do is try our best to make it through with love.